Okay, so when we start to cook protein, and this is gonna, please, I don't wanna lose you through this, so I'll try to make it as fun and relative as possible. So when we start to cook protein at 104 degrees, water actually starts to go to the surface. If we were to do a microscopic look of a steak while it was cooking, you would see that was the very first thing. Because of the boiling temperature of water and how water will start to leach out, it will come to the surface. And as it does, it actually gains protein, and the muscle structures, all the different muscle structures that are tied together are actually going to start to unravel at this point, right? And they become pretty soft. Next up, at right around 140, collagen starts to shred, and the muscle itself and the fibers start to really unravel. You will see this in the protein that will start to leach at the top. Now, think of this like salmon. Anytime you bake salmon, what usually happens with the fat? It kind of leaches to the top, right? So the fat in salmon and the fat in like a beef steak are going to act a lot differently. However, what you will see is at this point, when it starts to come up, this is adding more protein to the surface area of the steak. That's flavor, right? That protein is actually bringing with it some fat. Fat equals flavor, okay? Next up, oxygen starts to leave the meat. The oxygen that is bound within the cells of the protein actually start going to the top. This is not really where you get your sizzle from. You get your sizzle whenever you have a steak from the searing off of those amino acids and really kind of all that magic that's happening with the fat that's actually coming to the surface as well. Next up, this is when you actually start to become nice and the meat starts to dry out. In French, we call this al sec. Al sec is to become dry. And so what that means is that we're actually leaving the building blocks for everything that we think a good steak should be, right? But 167 is pretty high as far as how you might like your steak cooked. 140 is going to look a lot different than 167. 167 is close to a well-done steak. So in Texas, that's a lot of people don't know this, but that's jail time. Cook a well-done steak, you put ketchup on it. In Texas, you're done. You're done. Any other Texans here? Just me? I can say whatever I want. You guys know. Next up is where really the Maillard reaction happens. So later on in the week, we're going to do a even deeper dive into this kind of culinary phenomenon. If you love brisket, if you love ribs, if you love that crunchiness or that cooking of those amino acids, you love the Maillard reaction. We get a Maillard reaction whenever we grill a steak. We get the Maillard reaction whenever we eat a piece of toast. It's the cooking of all these amino acids that actually lend themselves to thousands of different flavors. If we were to take the Maillard reaction completely away and you were to eat a steak, it would be like the difference between a steak that was boiled and a steak that was grilled. That char, that crust that we really like, that's that Maillard reaction. And it's crucial, it's pivotal for any type of actual high heat cooking. Okay, and you only get that by forming a crust. You only get that from the crust of a brisket. You only get that from a steak that actually has a really, really nice burn on it, or a really nice crust. And then next up, you're at the 266 and 284. So this right here, that, like I said, that's illegal in Texas. So this is just burnt steak. You're left with nothing little than just protein. And this protein is overcooked. Each one of the muscle structures are exhausted. Everything is kind of falling apart. It doesn't taste good, and the texture itself is lacking. It's little more than like a shoe leather at that point, right? So allowing to rest. So I like to teach. I like to teach in analogies, and I always use the analogy of a high school kegger, like a high school party, right? So what happens when the cops show up at a high school party? Tell me. You scatter. You run. Okay. So I tell you these analogies because what I want you to do is later on when you're about to cut into your steak, you're like, oh, that's right. Chef Josh told me not to do that. So what ends up happening is when we sear a steak, we're creating that Maillard reaction on the outside of the steak, which is sealing all of those juices that we love on the inside of the steak. What happens is because the inside of the steak is still at 140, 150, 160 degrees, we remember from high school that those molecules are jumping all over the place. Well, now as they're jumping all over the place, they have nowhere to go because you've created a crust on the outside of that steak. That steak then is a time bomb, essentially. And what I mean by that is the moment you cut into it, just like those kids at that kegger when the cops show up, they go all over your plate. This is why when you make your turkey at Thanksgiving, it says, hey, let it rest for about an hour. You want to give it that time for all those molecules and all that moisture, that's mostly water, right? We learned that a second ago, that happens to be bouncing all throughout the steak. The moment that you cut into it, you release that out onto the plate and out of what you're actually going to eat. So I implore you to just be patient. This goes for a small cut of nilgai, or it goes for a massive turkey, or even a brisket. We never take brisket strictly right out of the smoker and start cutting it. We want to give it a chance to rest, okay? And this goes for seafood as well. We want to pay attention to what that reaction has done for us, and we don't want to lose all that hard work by just cutting right into it, right? So I have a nice hot pan. This pan is given to us by our friends over at Camp Chef. We're going to do a cast iron cooking course on the last day. It will actually just be diving into the science of why cast iron is so great. I still cook with my grandmother's. I mean, I love you guys. I wasn't going to ship my massive cast iron from Texas. But if you look at it, this is brand new. If you look at it, you can tell the difference. It has a beautiful patina on it. It was my great-grandmother's from Bavaria, so she actually brought it over from Bavaria. And this thing is a prized possession in our house. Not this one is now, but the one that we use. Take good care of your cast iron. Never goes in the dishwasher, just like your knives, right? We talked about that earlier. You don't let it soak. Don't use any type of astringent product. No cleaning chemicals go into this. Everything that goes into this actually needs to help the metal. And then when you're done, because this is a constant, it's exactly what it is. It's a cast piece of iron. They'll take the iron and they'll press it, and this is what you get. If you are just simply left with like an alloy with many different molecules, you have aluminum, you have copper, you have all those others, they cook a little bit different than something like this. So nice, good, sturdy, take good care of it. So a little bit about salt. We love salt. Salt actually helps all of our molecules or all of our cells communicate electrodes to each other. So salt's crucial in our diet. If you ask my mother, who salts everything, especially when I put it right in front of her, I've been cooking my whole life. You know, I travel around the country cooking, and I put like something that I made specially for my mother, and she's just like, I'm so excited to eat this, Josh. This is going to be so great. Mom, my God. So I have a piece of top sirloin from nilgai. I've really kind of cut down because I wanted to go through a couple of reactions here. So this is kosher salt. The reason why I like kosher salt is because of its structure. If you were to take this and look it under a microscope, if you were to take this right, it's not like your iodized salt. That's pretty close to perfect, but it little squares, kind of rounded squares. Sea salt's fantastic, good minerality, good flavor. Kosher I just like, and the reason why I like it is when I salt it like this, if you were to do a slow motion, as I start to salt it, it actually falls at a triangle, okay? Because gravity's pulling it out, not straight down. Anybody who salts just like this, you're getting clusters of salt all throughout. You're doing this, it's falling down. If you're doing this, I'm gonna come hurt you because I can't, like this thing. I don't know what that. So nice and tall like that, and when it actually clings to the surface of the protein. Kosher salt does that best. Iodized salt will 9 times out of 10, if the protein's pretty dry, will actually skittle right across the top. So I have my nice hot pan. I use olive oil for high heat cooking, avocado oil for high heat cooking. I don't use soy in anything. I just particularly don't like it. It does have a high smoke point. Smoke point is when the point of diminishing value in a fat gets too high and it will actually start to break down. We know this at this right here at maybe 400 degrees right now. Nice hot cast iron. What will happen if I put butter in it? It's going to sear up. So the smoke point in that and other saturated oils or fats are going to be much lower. So this includes lard, this includes coconut oil. We were talking about coconut oil earlier. Bringing that down to a temperature that actually will not cause it to smoke. But you can tell right now this is 400 degrees roundabout, and you're not seeing a bunch of black smoke. So I'm going to take my nilgai sirloin. and I'm gonna put it in the pan. The moment I put it into the pan, what happens is that one little area around where that steak is, it actually starts to drop temperature. Cooking and using science to help you cook is all about anticipating it, and the moment I put it in there, I raise the heat. Now, cast iron, as wonderful as it is a horrible conductor of energy. And what I mean by that is the molecules don't accept it the way that an alloy would. It doesn't take it and kind of spread it out. That's why I can sit here and hold on to this. However, if I superheat this and in 20 minutes I come back and it's off, y'all know that this pan's still gonna be hot. So it will conduct the heat. However, what it will do, so notice one thing I'm not doing. I'm not poking and prodding. I'm not going through and being super careful because I want that crust to form. I teach a lot back in South Texas. I teach a lot of young cooks, and these young cooks, especially the young men, what they will do is they like having tools, right? And they like they're not patient like the young ladies, some of them, and they just kind of sit there and they wait. And they're letting science do the work. Men are like, no, I gotta move this around. The moment that you start, and I have to break these young cooks of this, the moment that this starts to cook, if I go through and I start to flip it over, what I'm doing is I'm removing that protein from its cook surface, and when I do, I'm essentially halting that Maillard reaction. That crust will form something called fond, F-O-N-D. That fond is crucial for flavor, not only on the Maillard reaction of the steak, but also making a sauce. If you were to take that crusty stuff that is down on the bottom of the pan after you sear a steak, or you cook a hamburger in a cast iron skillet, that leftover Maillard reaction, that fond, is culinary gold. Why is that? It's because all of that flavor, all of those amino acids, all of those fats are condensed. It's like concentrated orange juice. It's a condensed flavor. And so then what we're able to do is degrease it and lift that away from the pan. So as this starts to cook, what ends up happening is this is always gonna let you know, especially a lot of young cooks are really, they wanna turn over because they don't wanna burn it. This is going to let you know when it's done. You don't worry about non-stick when you're doing it correctly. If the heat is high enough, the Maillard reaction is gonna be all the non-stick that you need. Does that make sense? Because what it does is it will form a crust, and then the last layer is right around 240 degrees. It starts to separate, and when it separates, you can just as easily take it and turn it over. Now, if you see that on the camera, this is the Maillard reaction at work. This right here is resulting in those cooking of amino acids. If we were to separate all those thousands of amino acids and lay them out and try each one, you would taste flavors you've never ever tasted before. But when they're in conjunction with fat, they're in conjunction with protein, what you do is you get that entire crust, you get that wonderfulness. You'd be hard pressed with this piece of nilgai and a piece of ribeye, searing them both side by side, same seasoning, same cut, same amount of fat, you would be able to slice it, eat it, and go, I can't tell which is which. Because that Maillard reaction is the same regardless of what it is. Now, obviously a chicken breast will be much leaner, so you're gonna get a little bit less out of that. So if you can see, can y'all see that crust on the bottom? That is culinary gold. So I'm not going to just constantly move the steak around, and I'm not going to go through, especially with a pair of tongs, and scrape the bottom of that pan. What I am going to do is just let that cook. Water is starting to leach to the top, and this is what's going to give us our popping. If you have your hand right here, like I feel the popping against my arm right here. This right here is where the water is leaching out of those cells, and especially if you did something like a wet age, we'll go over that in one of our courses on Saturday. A wet age is going to really lend itself to that because it's going to help dry it out a little bit more. So that Maillard reaction, that's exactly what we want. You can only get that really through time and being patient, right? So what I will do is I'll turn this on its side and sear that, and then I'm going to turn my pan off. Reason being is that I don't need to waste that butane, but also now the heat of the pan is starting to plateau, and then it'll start to come back down. This handle now is pretty darn hot. Earlier I was able to pick it up, right? So last but not least, how would we actually pull that fond off of the bottom of the pan? we would deglaze it. So a lot of people, some people use water. In Texas, we use Shiner Bock. You ever had Shiner Bock? Pour Shiner on, oh, it's amazing. So you pour it on the bottom. You obviously want to get as much of the oil out as possible. Beer is made of water. Oil is not. You know what happens afterwards. So what we do want to focus on is releasing those amino acids that are burned to the bottom, because these are, like we said, the concentration of those flavors. And then using alcohol not only deglazes the pan, but it actually is the building block for your sauce. So after that, you can add butter to it. After that, you can really do a lot just to kind of expand out that flavor and add a little bit of citrus or some bright notes with vinegar or whatever the case may be. So then we're left with a really clean, nice little top sirloin steak there. It's pretty small, but because of how lean this is, we started off this big. This will contract, right? It'll start to get nice and tight. And then what I am going to do is I'm just going to let that rest. And we talked about that. Cutting it right now will cause all those fluids to leach out onto the pan or onto our plate.